Live from WW. I'm not Charlie. I can't do that. Welcome everybody to this special edition of both Subclub Podcast and Revenue Cat live stream. We're pulling double duty here. I just did a bunch of push-ups, so I'm out of breath, trying to get my energy up. Charlie and I have been in Cupertino all week. I just flew home late last night and been talking to folks on the ground. Charlie was at WWDC. He got a ticket. I did not. But for those on the podcast who might not know Charlie, Charlie, why don't you do a quick intro of yourself and maybe tell us about your week real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Charlie Chapman. I'm a developer advocate here at Revenue Cat, and I also have a bunch of indie apps that I make myself, iOS and macOS and stuff like that. And yeah, this was my second WWDC that I've gotten a ticket to go into the spaceship, and it was really cool. I mean, it's funny. I think we're gonna have an interesting conversation here because I've been very deep in the thick of it in the in-person developer community here on the ground, which I'm going to guess, and you'll confirm or tell me I'm wrong, that the experience in person and the vibe in person is very different than the internet discourse, which I've actually been a little disengaged with. So I think we're going to kind of be able to represent two different takes here. So I'm still here right now, and kind of riding high on that positivity, I think. And so yeah, we'll see how our two experiences compare.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I was, man, I intended to do even more of the community stuff. I was staying in the same hotel as Community Kit. I actually got really sick the first day.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, I think it was just travel and caffeine timing and stuff. I got like a wicked migraine. Watch the keynote from my room instead of Community Kit. So I definitely did get less of the in person than you, even though I was there in person for Community Kit and other events, and went to dinners, and I did meet with a lot of folks and had a lot of very interesting conversations during the week. But I was back in my hotel room and uh, following the kind of vibe on Twitter and online. And I actually did take a minute to watch some YouTube videos. I went to the talk show with John Gruber, and he had Joanna Stern and Nilay Patel on, which was really fascinating. So I definitely did get more of the outside perspective probably than you did. Although I'm
Yeah.
super jealous that you got to watch the F1 movie live in person at the Steve Jobs Theater. You gotta, I think there's enough like, fanboys like us on listening to the podcast and on this webinar. Give us the like 90 seconds of how that experience was.
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool. Like if you're a person who's obsessed with Apple and architecture the way that many of us probably are, just getting to see the Steve Jobs Theater and go down those spiral stairs that I've seen in lots of pictures was really cool. And then there was like a little interview at the beginning with Jerry Bruckheimer, and then you watch the movie, and it was like a nice movie theater to watch the movie. It was a fun crowd that was super into it, but I will say the sound system there was remarkably good.
I bet.
There's a lot of things that are sometimes overhyped, I think, but that was one that definitely lived up to the expectation, especially with
And,
that movie, I think.
and how was the movie? Should I go watch it on opening day?
Yeah, I think I'm not allowed to give a official thumbs up, thumbs down review, but
Oh,
I
okay.
definitely really liked it. I'm a big fan of that director already. I really liked like the Top
Right.
Gun movie and some of his previous films, so I was predisposed to like it, but I thought it was really fun.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to kick things off, and those of you listening live or on the podcast, you'll have to excuse both Charlie and I. We are exhausted. It has been a very long week, so my voice is probably going to trail off as we chat, and Charlie's voice is noticeably raspier. You've got even more radio voice going this week. So this may be a little less polished than you're used to, but I think we'll have fun. And honestly, Charlie, you and I just can chat for hours about this stuff. So just talking to you for a couple of minutes is already re-energizing me a little bit. So
Yeah, and
the
to
first,
add really quick to add to that apology tour, I do have a fancy microphone and a whole bunch of fancy gear, but I was foiled by a single micro USB cable that I forgot at home. So we're on the lapel mic. I know it's not as good as you're probably used to as well, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, the laugh mic does actually miss the low tones of your voice. We don't quite get the same the Charlie
Yeah,
radio voice. All right, well, enough navel gazing. Everybody's here to hear about WWDC, and I wanted to kick things off with the meta. In my impression, and I think this is kind of what you were alluding to as well, Charlie, about the difference between on the ground and kind of the Twitter backlash, is that this year more than ever, I do feel like actions, you should interpret the action speaking louder than words, in that Apple very clearly did not say much. They didn't say anything about the injunction. They didn't even really kind of go out of their way in the keynote and state of the platform state of the union. To It definitely wasn't an apology tour, which part of me was hoping for a little bit of a,
yeah,
maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a WWDC where the whole theme was like, we love developers. And the fact that Apple has done that in the past gave me a little hope that this would be a kind of we love developers. I did appreciate there were definitely notes in there. The song at the very end of the keynote, singing the app reviews, that was a really nice touch. But generally in the keynote and even in the platform State of the Union, there wasn't a strong nod of like, hey, we really care and we know that things feel tense right now. But I think that the actions in what they released and what they actually did for us does speak volumes, even if they didn't, come out with a very un-Apple kind of apology tour that some of us might have hoped. Is that the sense you got on the ground as well?
yeah. I think there were. Yeah, I think also I was hoping for maybe more of the like the Mac Pro roundtable kind of, hey, we hear you. Not necessarily a full-throated apology because that's kind of not really Apple-y, but a kind of, we get it, we hear you, maybe something bigger. And so it was a little disappointing in that regard. But then there were little touches throughout. Like you said, there was that song at the end that actually I felt like played played very well. Um, I think it was kind of in the video, but one of the things in person that they did was there was like walls of app icons that were sort of like floating up in between sessions and stuff, and those were, I believe, just the app icons from everybody who got a ticket. Like they just pulled their developer ID, so
Oh,
there was
that's
like
so
people taking
cool.
pictures with it. Um, there was a couple nods to like this is a developer event and not just a press event. Like the visitor center used to be completely closed off and only accessible to the press, and they like kind of opened it for a few days to developers on the roof. And there was like little touches here and there where they kind of were like yeah, we hear you, we care about you, but it definitely wasn't this big like turnaround moment. It was more just like incremental. And I personally, at least, I do still feel like there's a lot of room for improvement in that relationship. um
Yeah, I've been hammering Apple, honestly, for years now, that I personally don't think, I think for things to really change, Apple does need to shift the PR narrative. I think they're very used to just kind of, we know we're right about certain things, and I shit post on Twitter all the time, and I know, even when I'm shit posting, I know I'm like 50% or more wrong about certain things. But it's like, it's just that you want to feel heard, and when Apple kind of
yeah,
stonewalls and doesn't speak authentically, you doesn't acknowledge the tensions, doesn't speak to those things the way other humans do, and even other companies do. I think that's where it falls a little flat. And that's where, all the touches in person and some of the smaller touches throughout the week do go a long way. But like you, I think that it feels like Apple needs to start taking a more open approach to how they work with developers, how they communicate to developers, and I don't know if this will ever happen, but fingers crossed. I'm like forever hopeful that Apple will start to shift this kind of thing and not. I commented to somebody yesterday. It feels like they're still running the reality distortion field PR playbook, but without Steve Jobs, it just falls flat. It's like we love Steve for the just how brazen and brash and we knew he was lying, but we loved him for it. Whereas when it's a recorded video that's going out to the public, even the press, I feel like, is a little kind of fed up with that style. I just don't think one, it doesn't fit without Jobs, and then two, it's 2025. Like I just don't quite think the way they try to control the narrative works for them as well as maybe they think it does or hope it will or whatever. And I think we saw Apple not doing an interview with Gruber, which I think was a little bit of a slap in the face to the developer community. And then they did do one with Joanna Stern, and she was freaking awesome. Um, really asking the hard questions and putting execs in an uncomfortable place, asking the questions that all of us want to have answers to, but still didn't get clear answers, got talking points, got spin, and I think that's just unfortunate. I hope we see a shift in tone, and I think a shift in tone would actually go a long way.
Yeah, I agree, and I think um, the sentiment on the ground was similar. That was something I was curious about. Like sometimes you get there in person, and there's all these people that don't know every podcaster and every blogger, and they don't read Stratechery, and you kind of realize that there's a huge swath of developers that aren't terminally online like we are. But them not going on the talk show was kind of the talk of the town, especially before the event happened, and so there's consequences to that, and I'm sure they're aware of that, but it definitely impacts how people feel about the company for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into what people are really here for.
Yeah,
Again, I
yeah.
feel like we're navel gazing so much. Hopefully, people find our like hot takes interesting. Um, but I did want to kick it off with or kick it off a third time. This is like the third topic already, but I wanted to kick off the meat of the conversation with liquid glass, which is where Apple kicked things off with a keynote. And my perspective. Well, first I'll say I freaking love it. I think a lot of Twitter was very dismissive. You had all sorts of people pretending to be designers and hammering Apple on the legibility and all that kind of stuff. And I get it. And honestly, the first day I was super disappointed. Like, oh, geez, we're like stepping back to iOS 7, and how could they make such a huge mistake? And probably more in person than on Twitter, I was really dismissive of liquid glass. But once I put it on my device, I really like it. And I think I kind of quickly filtered my view of it through the known iteration process. Almost always Apple kind of overdoes something and then pulls it back during the betas. And I was even thinking there's a bit of just the kind of Apple marketing hype where in the keynote, they want it to just look so striking and gorgeous and pretty. And I wonder if that was even intentional. It's like, yeah, we could dial it back a little, but like for the keynote, let's just go big. Like, let's just make it
Yeah.
look good. And again, I mean, maybe in 2025, that does fall a little flat because I did see a lot of influencers. I watched Marquez Brownlee, I watched other YouTube folks talk about their kind of initial reactions, and again, most of them didn't have time to put on their device and spend a long time playing with it, so the day one reactions were a bit muted. But my personal take is that as people use it over the summer, as Marquez and these other big YouTubers and journalists and others really use it over the summer, and then especially as they dial it back a little over the summer, I think this is going to be a huge release. And then what I think is especially interesting is that it being a huge release is a huge opportunity. I think it's a huge opportunity for existing apps to steal market share from competitors. So if your competitor is
Hmm.
not jumping on this opportunity and I mean, yeah, I'm working on an update to my weather app. And if there's so many weather apps, I don't think I'll be the only one. But if I can be one of the 3 to 5 weather apps that's like the talk of the town when iOS 26 comes out, I think that's a huge opportunity for me. And I'm jumping on it. I'm super excited about this opportunity. And then secondarily, I think it's a huge opportunity for new apps. So if there's a new idea or a new spin on a to-do list or a new spin on a habit tracker or whatever, I'm throwing out ideas that, probably some people in the audience already have apps in the space and don't want me to say. But, if you've ever had an idea for a new spin on something, anytime there's a major shift like this, it's actually a great opportunity to release a new app and start from scratch of like, what is a to-do list app in the era of liquid glass feel like? And so I just think it's a massive opportunity. I assume you agree.
Yeah, I think I had a similar reaction in the immediate aftermath of the announcement because I think I was hoping for a bigger like UX redesign, and it wasn't really that. It was a lot more. It's a new material to kind of play with.
Oh, let
But
me interrupt you a little
oh
bit
yeah,
there. Maybe you haven't had as much time on the betas. There are some really cool changes to a lot of the apps. Like messages is dramatically different, calendar is dramatically different. There are as you honestly, I've had like multiple wow moments throughout the week as I launch new apps and kind of go through my normal day-to-day usage of iOS where I'm like, ooh, look at what they did here. And I do think there really are some like genuine kind of UI paradigm shifts and user experience paradigm shifts that maybe are easier to miss if it's not on your carry device and if you're not using it as much as I had since putting it on my phone. I think I did it like Tuesday morning.
oh, I did it. I did it like at to Apple Park. So and I eventually caved and put it on my Mac, and it's on my iPad, and it's on my watch. It's on everything. And that's what I was gonna say is like once I got it on device, uh, I was a lot more excited about it. I still don't think it's a big user experience shift in terms of how we think about design, but I do think it's a big shift in terms of minimalism versus surprise and delight. There's so much, and that what you were saying. There's all these moments of ooh, and especially when you're in person with a bunch of nerdy developers, the amount of times somebody goes, "Oh my gosh, have you seen this?" And we're constantly doing that. So there's quite a bit of stuff going on, and one of the biggest ones I think is obviously liquid glass, the material. But I think bigger than that, and you mentioned messages, is this kind of like Apple being okay with going kind of wild and letting the experience be a little crazy, maybe a little too crazy in times. And I'm sure, like this, like you said, kind of, they probably release this pushing really far, and then I'm sure over the betas they'll dial it in a little bit. Um, but it's just fun and delightful in a way that I
Yeah.
think we all can take, as app developers can take as an example and bring that into our apps. And to your point about the opportunity, to me, that is what I was desperately hoping for, selfishly, as an indie app developer, is something where Apple can release a thing that immediately makes every app that doesn't do it look old. Whenever I first released my app, that was one of the big differentiators. Is most of the big apps in that space still either looked like iOS 6 era, or like it looks like they were clearly designed in that area and they just took away textures or something. And this represents another one of those opportunities. You can be the app that very obviously in screenshots is modern looking. And that is a nice thing if you're looking for a way to kind of differentiate.
Yeah, not to mention getting featured.
Oh, are you talking about me?
Yeah. Well, you and I mean, just generally, I was trying to
Oh
set you
yeah,
up for
yeah.
that of like that anytime there is this opportunity, Apple does love featuring apps that take advantage of the new thing. And that was a whole section I have in my notes. It's like play the game. is that, by adopting liquid glass, not only are you setting yourself up for Apple to feature you, which, is less important these days in some ways, but man, little app of the day badge, like those kind of things do go a long way in user trust. So Apple featuring you, but then also press, you and I both,
Yeah.
something part of our kind of marketing playbook is to do unique things that get attention. And so this fall will be a great opportunity. I feel like maybe more so than in years, maybe the widgets and Widgetsmith was the last kind of like big where the press was excited to kind of highlight new apps. And I think this is going to be a year where there will be a lot of discussion. And I mean, hey, this may be another opportunity too that TikTok influencers are going to be going through the app store like, hey, what's new, what's pretty, what's unique, what's out there. And another opportunity to not just get picked up by Apple, not just get picked up by the press, but now we have this like third dynamic of like, maybe you get in a Marquez Brownlee video, maybe you get in like a TikTok that blows up to 10 million views. So I think it's just like a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I think we'll get to this a little later, but it's not just liquid glass, but it's also the foundation models, like the AI features that Apple's added. There's a couple other smaller APIs that I think there's going to be people at Apple and potentially social media movements that can happen where people are just trying to highlight, apps that are taking advantage of this. And I think our job, if we're going to do that, is not just to build it, but to be able to tell the story of how Apple's technology enabled us to build this innovative thing. That's where I think that's where you get the best bang for your buck in terms of both press and Apple. If you can tell a story that ties into this broader narrative of the iOS 26 update, whenever that comes out in the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple notes on that. One is that, if Charlie and I have gotten you excited at all, don't jump right into designing. The first thing you need to do is watch all the WWDC. Golly, it's hard to say when I'm exhausted. WWDC sessions on liquid glass. I already watched two of them. And then the human interface guidelines, I actually did not even open it, but I saw a few people tweeting about it. And from what it looks like, there is a massive update to the human interface guidelines. So like download that PDF,
Yes.
go to a coffee shop, sit down with your drink of choice and pull it up on your iPad and just read cover to cover through the new human interface guidelines, because that's going to be the best way to prepare yourself. Even if you're a marketer, if you're a product person, if you're at a bigger company, this is not just for indies, although Charlie and I in some of this conversation maybe you're skewing a little indie, but if you're at a bigger app company, you can be the person inside the company saying, hey, this is a really cool opportunity, let's do it. And then read through the document and watch the session so it can be done well. Because if you do it well, that, to your point, Charlie, being able to tell the story, being able to get it right, and not just like, like one of the things they talked about is don't put glass on glass. I think that's going to be a mistake a lot of people make that actually makes it look worse or feel worse, even if it looks cool, is that if you stack glass on glass on glass, sounds good, like, oh, every glass, everything. But once you start playing with it, you see there is like a hierarchy, there is a visual language to it that you need to match. And then one other note on that, this came up on Twitter a lot, is that Apple in the platform State of the Union very specifically through third-party frameworks under the bus. I don't think they said React Native or Flutter by name. The fascinating part here, though, is that React Native, because it does render to native system components, is a great framework to work in to adopt liquid glass, because the community is already jumping on it. And like the day of
Yeah.
release, people were updating React Native components to make sure that it worked with the liquid glass paradigm. Flutter, on the other hand, it's so much of the UI is actually, and you may be able to speak to this better, but is rendered natively. And then I saw a lot of dismissive tweets about it doesn't seem like Flutter is going to move quickly. So maybe Apple's comments very directly apply to Flutter, but not to React Native, which is encouraging.
Yeah, it's interesting because the design is that React Native is using those native controls under the hood. So it'll be able to jump on these easily and use Apple's actual same metal renderer for all of this stuff. Flutter isn't going to be able to get that out of the gate. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure there's a bunch of Flutter engineers desperately trying to mimic those visual effects to see, or at least get close to it. But the interesting thing about Flutter is, I believe, because it is rendering it the same on all devices, if they can replicate it, or at least get close to it, that will also apply to Android and I think the web as well. So there's kind of trade-offs with all of these different systems, and it'll be interesting to watch them all kind of try to figure out how to bring this into their frameworks.
Yeah. All right. So there's two more big changes I wanted to talk about, but let's speed run these since we have so much more to cover. Excuse me. The first one is iPad OS 26. This is maybe the biggest change, or the biggest. It's like Apple's finally building iPad OS the way it maybe should have been like a decade ago, of windowing and more a background API where it can operate more like a desktop, where you can push a task into the background to complete while a user switches to another window. There's aspects of this, and I did see. I didn't watch the full interview, but in one of the interviews the execs did, they talked about how it took the M series processor to be powerful enough to be able to have multiple windows going on at the same time. Now, I saw some people saying that's BS and like they could have done this sooner, and that's just an excuse and it's post hoc rationalization. But there really is probably something there, that when you have like 6 different windows floating in the same view, and being able to push things to the background while other apps are running their processes and switching seamlessly between them, there probably is at least some truth to that. And so I don't, iPad has always been this weird thing where iOS is such a dominant platform because it's what everybody has in their pockets, and iPad is a smaller platform. But these days, a smaller platform compared to iPhone is still like a massive platform. So,
Yeah.
I don't think the opportunity is quite as big on iPad as it is on iPhone, but I think it is an opportunity. And for the right app, for productivity, for those sorts of things, I think iPad is an opportunity this year, and one not to just gloss over.
Yeah, I agree. I think from a developer standpoint, there's not a whole lot of new APIs to play with to enable new types of apps, as far as I can tell. The background tasks are, I think, something that are going to be a really big deal for like creativity apps. I think my conspiracy theory here is there's all these rumors that next year we're going to enter the foldable iPhone world. And so
Ah.
I think there might be something to the idea that all of a sudden they really focused on getting windowing uh, working a lot better in a iOS like environment. And so it might be a good test bed to run your app on the iPad, shrink it, and see how it like plays with window resizing now, as a way to maybe theoretically prepare for this foldable iPhone future that's coming. Um, yeah, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but that's kind of my conspiracy theory right now, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it, more or less.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And similar to iPad, even if Apple does release a folding phone next year, they're probably not going to sell 100 million units. That's going to be kind of it's almost going to be like this, whatever it would be, like a 10th platform. Yeah.
Yeah,
You have
yeah, but the
watch
cohort
and
of users buying that are going to be the type of users who probably are willing to pay a lot more.
yeah, no, absolutely. Um, the other thing I did want to talk through is the on-device language models, and you and I, Charlie, have already been debating, and we probably could debate for another hour, but let's keep it to a few minutes here. I I'm skeptical of on-device models for a few reasons. One is that is for people who are paying for something, I think for most folks here, if you're an indie and you just want to build something fun and cool and do something interesting, I think there's fun and interesting things to do with the local models. But if you're expecting people to pay for something, I think the expectations, the bar for the quality of an LLM output is being raised literally on a weekly basis these days. And my concern is that, even using their examples, like Apple said, if you're all trails, you can use our local models to plan your trip. Well, I don't want my hiking trip planned by a tiny little local ChatGPT 3.5 level model. I want it planned by O3 Pro with deep research that's going to like take into account all the different factors that a small local model can't take into account. Um, and the thing that I think is more interesting with local models is models that are context specific, that are fine tuned, that are like a translation model. You can fine tune a larger model or build a translation specific model that's trained only for translation, and on device that can perform at a speed and at a level more comparable to online, even if it's still, maybe you can get 90% there instead of 60% there. But my concern is that for a generalized large language model, the output is just going to be so subpar compared to what you can get with a cloud-based model. And then especially again, like Apple's on-device model versus an OpenAI model, and the cost and the speed and even the latency, OpenAI is and Anthropic and Meta and even there's Grok, not Grok, the language model from X, but Grok. There's a chip that's like an analog chip that runs LLMs ridiculously fast. So like there's so much going on in the industry around speed, latency, quality, and everything else, that my concern is that the local models won't be as big a deal as they seem, because once you get to playing with them, it's like, yeah, it works, but like the output's just not that great. So I'm open to changing my mind here. I'm excited to see what people build with it, but personally, and I've been super plugged into AI. My 16-year-old son is so into it. We like have nightly debates almost about like what models and how they're performing and local versus cloud. And so like this is something I am pretty into these days. In part just because my son talks to me about it constantly. And so my concern is that some of the hype around it was maybe a little misfounded in not understanding those sorts of limitations. And then just one more thing to add, since I'm monologuing, but I want to let you have a chance to defend and put your 2 cents in. But I just saw on Twitter before we joined, like an hour ago, that the context window of these local models is only 496 tokens, which is tiny. So it's not like you're going to be able to throw this big, corpus of text into that large language model. You're going to be able to send like little tiny bits of context in there, in order for it to give this output. And again, the expectation now is that the large language models will have way more context and have larger context windows where you can just shove a ton of stuff into them. And you're just not going to get that with these local models. So I'm excited for the potential, worried it's overhyped, but then the other thing is, I do think this sets us up for the future, in that it's only going to get better from here. And so maybe this is a baseline, and then 3 years from now, Apple's models are better, the devices are faster, the distills are better, and so Apple needed to do this in a way because it's building toward a future where they get better and better. But I'm concerned that as we start playing with them, that the output's just not going to be good enough to build like tentpole features around. Tell me I'm wrong.
Yes. Well, the very last thing you said, I think I strongly agree with, which is building tentpole features around. I think the thing that's the most like, don't build a chat bot around this. I've already seen plenty of people do it, and it's, as you would expect, it's not good compared to a big, large internet-based model. Where I've seen it be really interesting is as a way to like extend what your app already does and make it better or nicer in random little ways. Because the big thing that it seems to provide is, like we said, it's free and it's on device. And actually, the thing that really surprised me is it's really fast, like surprisingly fast. Um, and I think that probably has to do with how small the context window is and how small the whole thing is. Um, but I've seen a lot of people doing like basic sentiment analysis type stuff on device. Um, One of the really interesting use cases that I've seen is for like large enterprise type apps that have advanced search. That's a major part of how you use your app. Um, if you can have a prompt basically, so where somebody can type in what they want. Like if they're looking for, I don't want to pick a specific industry, but doing some kind of search where you're like, I want something that's this color and this size and blah blah blah. And those are already all checkboxes and sliders and stuff in your advanced search. Because the way Apple designed the API, which I will try not to gush over, but that is actually the thing that's the most impressive about this as a developer. So the API is actually kind of really, really incredibly well done. But
Well,
the way they designed it is,
I know you weren't going to dive into, or maybe you're going to get to this, but maybe we should dive just a little deeper into the details. In that, one thing I am super excited about is can the API, can you bring in other models that are fine tuned, and can you fine tune your own models and like drop them into the API in a way that you can get more specialized models, because specialized models on device seem most exciting to me in that that you get the performance, you get the local, you get like everything else. But then if it's a specialized model, then the output can be more comparable versus this generalized model that just can't be anywhere near as good as the bigger model. So can you drop your own models in? And does the API seem designed kind of with that in mind?
I don't know about like pre-trained other models. Obviously, you can provide it context, but I think that's all going into the context window. The way you do it is in a very structured way. I think that's the thing that's kind of different than the internet-based tools I've at least played with. And what that means is you can also guarantee that the way you get it back is in that same structure that you asked for. So what that means is like in that search example, it's like you can have somebody prompt with words what they want to do, and then you can send that to the model and you tell the model exactly how your search works and what the exact search shape of the data that you need back looks like, and it will 100% give it to you back in that exact structured data. And at least in the playing around with it that I've seen people doing, it's really good at that kind of stuff. I mean, it's pretty simple. That kind of stuff is really simple. And you're not asking for like high quality writing or image generation or any of the things that these bigger models are really pushing far on. You're asking for something that's really kind of basic. And so I think like natural language processing is now a thing that Apple has wrapped in a way that is as simple to use as the Maps API lets you map the entire world, or the WeatherKit API lets you do weather stuff. Um, and it does it on device really quick. And there's lots of little features that you can add inside of there. So I think on two vectors, it's interesting. The first is obviously like we talked about, indies. It's cheap. It's you're a super Apple person and you want to use all the Apple stuff. That's cool. But I think on the enterprise side, having been somebody who's worked at big companies, getting your big company to give you a like enterprise account to use some of these big new models is a process. Whereas this is just, it's on iOS. You can build a like actual, not mock-up, but proof of concept really quickly with these things, because it's all just sitting right there in code, and then you can show your manager and kind of move it up the chain. And then maybe it's not powerful enough to do what you need to do, and you shift it over to something on like a web-based API, or maybe you use it as the entry point and let it tell you whether or not it needs to do something more complicated. So I think we're going to see. I think it has the potential to be the like obvious first step for text-based input from users, and then from there you might need to go into a different direction. And I don't know exactly how it'll shake up, but I actually think I'm more optimistic about it now than I was before I saw how it all works, for whatever
Yeah,
that's
well,
worth.
yeah, and you're actually playing with the API. I'm not, so I'm just shit posting, shit taking, hot taking.
Oh, one,
um,
one more interesting note that people might be interested in is I've heard from people who do apps related to food, and the safety measures are intense on this one. And so like they found that having the word Thai or Chinese would cause it to send back results that are like, hey, we can't touch this. And so there might be some prompt engineering that needs to happen to be like, this is all food related. Don't, this isn't bad, but there could be some big roadblocks that people run into around the safety stuff that maybe you don't run into on some of these more cavalier models from these startups. So that's another thing to kind of keep your eye on.
yeah, and the 4096 token context window doesn't allow for a massive prompt either. So you're gonna have to balance
Yes.
both like how much prompting you do and then how much context you want to give it. But just to reiterate, I mean, I think my concern, and this is just like an eyes wide open kind of thing, and you're probably right in that it should be the starting point, and then as a starting point, the determining factor is, you know, did are in thorough testing, does the output seem to be 50% of the way there, 60% of the way there, 90% of the way there? And then is that output acceptable? And if it's not, then it needs to go to the cloud. And then, so then my kind of thought is that as you experiment, you're probably going to find it less useful and end up wanting to go to the cloud. But I would love to be wrong, because it'd be super cool if it is like 90% there, and that's a tolerable amount of loss in fidelity, that it will be useful for those sorts of things. And I do like your example, and from dark noise, is that everybody, image playgrounds was almost a joke this past year, but you had one use case that I thought was really good, and this is probably an example of the kind of use cases where even image playgrounds in the state it has been for the last year was useful. So why don't tell people how you integrated image playgrounds in dark noise and why it did actually work.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really straightforward, but basically, like, dark noise is a ambient noise app. So there's a bunch of different, obviously, white noise, brown noise, but then there's like rain and frogs and trees and stuff like that. And I have a feature in there where you can build a mix, so you can add them together and change the volume and kind of build a soundscape that you want. Um, and since the whole app is designed around these icons that work everywhere, I have like an icon builder. Um, and most people don't mess with that. They just use kind of the default one. So I just added a button to say generate one as well. And it actually would generate one using image playgrounds based on the name that you gave the icon. And then I could like inject you can't really prompt engineer image playgrounds, but you could inject terms to it. So I could say like black background to kind of try to force it to sort of fit with the app. And a lot of people actually use that because they just want a basic icon to go with the sound that they create. And I to like push that forward with the new foundation models. That's the same kind of thing I'm looking for. There is um, the ability to just auto create a title based on what's in your mix. That's the kind of stuff that it's not a tentpole feature, to your point, um, but it's something I feel like it's going to be pretty good at doing, is generate two words that represent the four sounds that you have in here and their volumes, and then also maybe like a way to generate a mix based on that structured data, based on a prompt or something like that. But those are all like not super tentpole features, but they're just kind of quality of life things that you can add into your app. And based on what I've looked at so far, I should be able to add them to the app very, very painlessly, which is, I think, one of the big selling points.
Yeah, I think that it's just that it's a great way to look at it too. It's like what are the less mission critical where users will tolerate it not being perfect because they can replace the icon, they can, do something else with the icon. The icon's not like fundamental to the app. And so it's a nice to have and a cool feature and some people will use it, but then it's not like breaking it's not all trails sending you down the wrong path. The consequences of it getting it wrong are so low that those are the kind of places to look at it. All right. Well, we've you and I could talk another hour, but let's
I
move
know, I'm
on.
trying to hold back.
All right. So on to some of the bigger announcements. We're already 45 minutes in, so maybe we speed run some of this, even though it should have maybe been the meat of the conversation. But Apple made some big updates to App Store Analytics, and I'm actually super excited. And I think um, yeah, I did see a few people tweet like, "Why do you even need Revenue Cat if the App Store analytics are so good?" And I think that's one fundamental misunderstanding of Revenue Cat. If you think our business prop is that we give you analytics, but two, I think it's also a fundamental misunderstanding of the kind of analytics that Revenue Cat provides. So while some of you may be thinking, "Oh, David's gonna like crap on this because it competes with Revenue Cat," I actually think it's super cool because there are things because of privacy and for other reasons that like only Apple can do. And Apple's doing those things. And I think it's a fantastic complement to. I have not been looking at App Store analytics for years because I use App Figures and Revenue Cat to look at my data. Uh, but given all of these updates, I'll probably be spending more time there. And I'll go to App Store for the things where the App Store really excels at, and I'll go to Revenue Cat for the user level analytics and cohorting that we do, and I'll go to App Figures for the financial and accounting and the things that they're good at. And so I don't think this in any way kind of replaces anybody. I think it's just a great addition to the landscape of when you're trying to figure out what to do next, when you're trying to understand your users. This is a whole nother set of data, and some of it is data you just can't get any other way. So I'm super excited about it. Did you look into this at all? And have you talked to folks on the ground about how this looked?
Yeah, I mean, from the people I talked to here, it was definitely not the talk of the town the same way
Right.
the liquid glass or any of that stuff was. Um, I haven't. You can answer this maybe. Is it actually live? Like, can we see this ourselves? I watched the
I don't
video, but I
know.
haven't actually seen it. Okay, okay.
I
Uh,
was so busy and I was flying back yesterday, so I watched the videos, but I have not cracked open App Store Analytics myself yet to see how much is live, how much is coming soon, what the
yeah, I'm seeing in
caveats
the
are.
chat people saying it looks like it's the same as it is now, at least currently as we record. Um, so yeah, like many of these things, the proof is in the pudding. So I was excited watching the session, and I think you probably dove in a lot more than I did into what it's offering. But I'm always curious what we're really getting versus what we're not. But honestly, just seeing the investment in it at all gets me really excited because hopefully we'll keep seeing that investment going forward.
Yeah, totally. Well, let me speed run some of the changes.
Yeah,
And again, you do want to watch these videos. Like if you care about um, data in your app, you want to watch the videos. And unlike me and Charlie, because I did it, he did it while like packing, had it in his ear, and I did it while flying home without a great internet connection. Unlike us, you probably want to watch the video with. Well, and I guess right now, in the chat, they're saying it's actually not live yet. But when it is live, you'll want to watch the videos with App Store Connect open and pause the video and go try the things that they're talking about and do your own analysis and stuff. But let me just kind of speed run some of the highlights just so you're aware of the things to look for. And there are a few things I think are especially interesting to me. Um, so one of the highlights is that you can have up to 7 filters at once instead of 3. I again hadn't spent enough time in App Store Connect over the past few years to know what a big difference that's going to be. But anytime you're able to filter by more things, you know, people who are on iOS 18.5 and they did this and they did that, and being able to kind of stack those things lets you dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and then compare against the cohorts that aren't on iOS 15 compared to, I mean, iOS 18.5 is the latest. So being able to compare and contrast on those deeper levels with those deeper kind of filters, I think is really interesting. They're doing a lot more cohorted views this year. Uh, the cohorts, very different approach than how we do it, but a lot of the cohorting is time since download. So like, what's your download to paid conversion, um, day 1, day 15, day 30. You can watch how those cohorts progress over time. So that's really interesting. Proceeds per download is similarly able to be cohorted like that. So you can see, and again, this is one of those where it's a look back kind of thing, and how interesting is it really. And we showed in the state of subscription apps reports that day one is where so much of it's going to happen. 80% of conversions for most apps are happening that day one of starting a free trial. But it is interesting to see, watch those cohorts and how they perform over time. And then you'll be able to like filter those and look at how the different cohorts perform over time. And so that, all very interesting stuff. One of the bigger things though is that they're adding even more benchmarks, which is fascinating. So similarly to what I just said about RevenueCat analytics, is that we do put out the state of subscription apps report every year. And so you might be thinking, oh, I don't even need to read that anymore. And I think the answer here is that Apple's going to show you some things that we can't show you, and we're going to show you some things Apple can't show you. And so I think they're really complementary, but it's super exciting that Apple is putting more benchmarks in there so that you can see like, how do you perform against other similar apps. And that's, Apple has a lot of data that RevenueCat doesn't have. And we don't break it down as specifically to apps like yours. Now,
I I have a
Apple's going to
question
have
about
their
that.
own. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding when they first started doing this benchmarking stuff a couple of years ago was that it seemed like it was pretty much broken down by category in the App Store. And maybe I was wrong about that, but in these sessions, I noticed they kept saying by other apps like yours or by apps that are peers or something like that. Do you understand, or do you have a sense of how those breakdowns are done, or is it just if your app's a health and fitness app, you're comparing against all health and fitness apps?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to get. You and I keep asking each other the questions that we were about to say.
We're
Um,
professionals. We're teeing each other up.
yeah. So I did not dig deep into that, but yes, my impression based on the way they're framing it is that they're not just doing category, but they are trying to do more kind of peer base. But and I was going to bring that up as a caveat in that what Apple thinks is something like your app may not actually be something like your app. So, as with RevenueCat's State of Subscription Apps report and any kind of benchmarking, you need to take everything with a reasonable grain of salt and kind of. And I don't have an answer today, but if you're going to make decisions based on the benchmarking in App Store Connect, read up on, and hopefully we'll be able to dig into this and publish a blog post or something like that discussing it. But read into how are they building those similar audiences. Is it just based on category? And then factor those sorts of things into your decision making around it. When we release a report every year, I mean, I have apps all the time asking me like, hey, like, we're technically in the fitness category, but we think our app performs more like an education app because it's a fitness app, but we're like an educational, like, we educate people about fitness, or we educate people about health and wellness. We're not like Headspace. And so that's where, in an ideal world, Apple is able to pick up on that and actually compare you to more similar apps. But we don't know exactly, the algorithm, whatever they're doing, is going to be fallible. So you need to take it with a grain of salt. But like, it's more data, and so it'll be interesting to dig around and see how you compare. But definitely something to take with a grain of salt.
Yeah. The other thing that I think in most of our reports we have is the breaking them down by the quartile that you're in.
Right.
Um, and that's one where I'd be really curious if Apple's doing that here too, where it's like, is my medium-sized startup, is it really does it really make sense for it to be compared in the same cohort as Netflix? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I would expect those numbers would look extremely different. So but like you said, it's more data. It's just with these types of things, it's always a little dangerous to just see a percentage and be like, you're in the bottom 20%. That's really bad. And it's like, well, who are you really comparing against
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
in this? But yeah, it's useful information, and I'm glad they're doing it.
Yeah, and then are you in the 20% in this metric, but you're 80% in another metric that makes up for it? Are you 20% in trial starts, but you're 90% in trial conversions? And a lot of context needs to be taken, but yes, more data, interesting. A few other highlights that I'll just speed run. They added MRR, monthly recurring revenue, and active subscriber movement, which looks a lot like our active subscriber movement chart. Retention averages that are cohorted. They have a nice subscriber retention view. I believe the subscriber retention view has been there a long time, but then now you can do a lot more filters. But the thing I'm and then they also introduced an API. I didn't get to dive super deep into like what exactly is available via the API, but that may be an interesting opportunity for an app figures and maybe even like a startup to build stuff around this to dive deeper than Apple does. But the one thing I'm super excited about is being able to filter by product page. And then I'll spoil something I was going to talk about later, and we'll just talk about it now, is that the custom product pages, Apple's doing some really cool stuff here. And, I've heard people complain about their product page A/B testing, and there are, it's never going to be exactly what we as a developer community want from Apple. But the custom product pages can now be associated with keywords. So you can go in and assign specific keywords to specific custom product pages. And then that data then gets passed through into the App Store analytics so that you can you can filter by, let me look at people who landed. And the example they gave in the session, so I'll just use it, is if you're a Strava, which I think is the kind of the example they're keying off of, and you appeal to both cyclists and runners, is that you may have a custom product page focused on runners, and you have a different custom product page focused on cyclists. And then what's cool is that then you can start breaking down all of these analytics by people who saw the cycling custom product page versus people who saw the running custom product page. That's similarly going to be tricky because sometimes runners may end up on your cycling page, and maybe that's dragging down the results of the cycling custom product page. And there's going to be caveats to figure out and all that kind of stuff. But the custom product page stuff is super cool, and being able to associate keywords with those, I think, is going to be super powerful. And then being able to filter it all by those custom product pages in App Store Analytics is going to be really great. So definitely looking forward to that. The next thing I'll kind of speed through is that, and Charlie and I both, we were talking before we went live that neither of us had time to dive super deep into this, but there seemed to be a lot of updates to the App Store Connect API. And in combination with the Analytics API, I do wonder if there's an opportunity here for somebody to build a great tool. So with the TestFlight API, it seems obvious for what's the word, Charlie? The continuous development systems where you're able to push builds and what's the developer term for that? Help me out here.
Oh, like build systems,
Build systems, continuous
continuous
integration, all that kind
development,
of
or continuous deployment is, yeah,
stuff. Yeah, Fastlane, Bitrise, those kind
yeah,
of
like
things.
CI/CD.
Yeah. So those systems seem most poised to take advantage of some of this, some of the stuff they did with the TestFlight API. But there, you will be able to, and this is what I'm specifically excited about, is in the TestFlight API, you'll be able to get access to the beta tester feedback. So you'll be able to, through the API, get screenshots and descriptions. So, this is maybe a fun app for an enterprising developer to build. And now that everything's so harmonious across Mac, iOS, iPad, you could build a cross-platform app that works across all three platforms to better manage your test flight feedback. That when things come in, you get a push and there's webhooks for this, so you can key into the webhooks so that anytime a beta tester gives feedback, you can get a webhook and send a push. And they built all of this into the App Store Connect app as well. So the App Store Connect app itself, but App Store Connect app is always going to be very Apple-y in the way they think about it and design it, kind of the base experience. So I think there's still opportunity to build kind of a more sophisticated experience on top of it. This was really cool. It's like, hey, we're going to add this into the App Store Connect app. What if we just open the API for everybody to do, so they could build their own systems on top of it? So being able to better manage test flight and customer feedback, I think is really interesting. So that's exciting. There's more, as I mentioned before, going into the analytics API. So that's all cool stuff. Anything you want to highlight there before we move on? I think we've lost Charlie. So
First, can you see?
your Wi-Fi is pretty bad.
Yeah.
I'll just move on while your Wi-Fi
Am I
recovers.
back?
Yeah, you're okay. You're back.
It's fallen down. Yep. Oh, you can hear me okay? Oh no.
All right, we'll edit that out on the podcast, and I'll just move forward and hope next interlude, Charlie will be better. Okay, so App Store Connect. Again, I'll kind of go through this pretty quick, but Apple is now going to use AI to generate tags for apps. This one is really interesting because it- it's very Apple in that there's this whole new tagging system, and the developers cannot initiate their own tag. So I can't go into App Store Connect and say, I want to be tagged as this kind of weather app and that kind of interaction or whatever. They're going to be automatically generated. And then the only option in App Store Connect is to actually remove the tags that the AI automatically assigned. You're not going to be able to self-assign tags. But another really cool step forward in that it's just going to be more surface area. And what they talked about in the session was how in the App Store Connect, they're going to surface these tags better. I imagine there will be kind of like filters, so you could search weather app and then filter by the tags. There's going to be places in the App Store where the tags are surfaced. And so you could see a whole group of apps related to that tag. So I think tagging is going to be super cool. And again, being able to unassign yourself from tags is really interesting, even if you can't, add your own tags. We already talked about custom product pages being associated with keywords. The AI generated review summaries is actually live already. They talked about it a little bit, but that has been live already. So you can go check your app. I was talking with some developers, in person at the event, where we were all kind of like searching our app to see like whose was live. And my impression was apps that get a lot of downloads and therefore a lot of review velocity are the ones that are getting those AI summaries. If you're not actively getting a lot of reviews currently, even if your app has a lot of reviews historically, it seems like it's keying more on that velocity for when it does generate the overview. So if you're a smaller app and not getting a lot of reviews now, you might not see it, but it is live on the App Store today. Offer codes is super interesting. So previously, offer codes were only available to subscriptions, and they're now available to consumables and one-time purchases. So like everything has offer codes now. Um, this is one I think you shouldn't sleep on. I've been experimenting with offer codes, and like everything, there's caveats. But I was doing this promotion with 50% off the first year, where you can just follow a link and get that promotion. The downside here is that it takes you to a redemption page that doesn't have screenshots, doesn't have any other context about your app. And then when I tested it, and I don't know if they fixed this, my app had a 7-day free trial plus 50% off for the first year, but the page you landed on just said 50% off for the first year. So it wasn't even clear that if you accepted, you would get the free trial. So there's going to be hiccups along the way. But this is another exciting point that they're moving forward with this kind of stuff. They're giving more opportunity. And this one in particular, I think is really interesting for affiliate deals because you can track the offer codes. Again, privacy limitation there is really strict in that you can only create 10 different offer codes. So you can't like spin up 100 different affiliates, each with their own offer code and track them seamlessly and get 100%. But you can have 10 different offer codes, 10 different trackable offer codes. And then you can create millions of codes under each of those, or 1 million across the 10 different offer codes. So really, really interesting, something to look into, to be able to just generate a link on the fly. Like, your holiday sale, if you don't want to create a whole custom paywall, you just want to do like a promotion on the web, it can be 20% off, follow this link, and then you can track it via that offer code. So it being available now for consumables and one-time purchases, I think is really cool. And those of you who haven't looked at it for subscriptions, I do think it's super interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting about all of this and kind of the meta of App Store and App Store Connect is it feels like Apple is starting to break away from the WWDC cycle, where we are going to get more interesting things coming throughout the year. As much as they did already announce, I think we probably will be seeing more things that are not even necessarily big announcements at a keynote, but are press releases, are a news item on the developer page of Apple. And of course, the press will pick that kind of stuff up, or the community will pick that kind of stuff up. But I think we're going to start seeing the App Store more and more decoupled from the WWDC release cycle, which I think is fantastic for the future of the App Store. All right, so I ran through a lot. You probably didn't hear all of it, Charlie, but any thoughts on App Store Connect and the App Store as things are changing?
Yeah, I think that last point you made is something I really noticed too. There was a significant amount of time in the videos spent on features that were released during the 18 cycle, especially 18.4. So there was quite a few things there that maybe didn't get the full attention of WWDC, but they're like willing to push things out as they go. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see them push on a lot of things. I think, like you mentioned, the taggable product pages and letting you send or show different product pages based on keywords. I think that might be the biggest opportunity in all of this for apps to maybe increase their I was gonna say increase their top of funnel. It's not that. It's actually you split the top of funnel into two different funnels, and then you can actually optimize totally separately now for different groups depending on what problem they're trying to solve as they search in the App Store. So I think there's a lot to dig into there and a lot of opportunity there.
Yep, cool. So StoreKit, this is something I think historically we've spent a lot more time talking through. We'll gloss over it this time for two reasons. One, there wasn't a ton of new stuff for StoreKit. If you're a StoreKit nerd, definitely watch the videos. I think a lot of you who are here watching this or listening to the podcast either already used RevenueCat, so you don't need to know the nitty gritty. RevenueCat's going to deal with it, or you're more product and growth focused anyway. So diving deep into the API related stuff of StoreKit is just, I think, less and less relevant to this audience. But there is new stuff. There's new transaction IDs and new download IDs and things like that that will make it easier for us at RevenueCat, and then easier for anybody who's built their own IAP management system to uniquely identify users across downloads and across devices and things like that. So very good stuff, but just not stuff that maybe warrants a longer discussion here. And we don't have Jacob on the call to talk about his favorite topic, StoreKit. So Yeah, I actually meant to mention that earlier. Jacob was supposed to be on, and then some stuff came up. Big shot CEO now, and so left it to Charlie and I to have this conversation. Anything you want to add on StoreKit, Charlie?
No, other than I think that was the area the most where I felt like most of those announcements were things that came out over the last like 6 months. So
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot necessarily new right now. I think it was an incredibly small amount. But over the last year, they have released things new there. But yeah, it's pretty nitty gritty and not necessarily. It doesn't really enable a bunch of new things. It just makes it makes our lives a little bit easier in terms of making the SDK robust for everybody.
Yeah. All right, attribution kit. There were announcements here, but before I tell you exactly what happened, and I'll just go through it quickly, but I'm going to read a tweet because I think this maybe is the best kind of top line summary. And so I'll just read the whole tweet live, and you can make your own conclusions. But Eric Sufer, who does dig way deeper into all of this than I do and kind of understands it all a lot better than I do, had this to say about the 2025 updates to Ad Attribution Kit. The Ad Attribution Kit updates announced at WWDC this week feel immaterial. They are mostly nice to have features that don't overcome the fundamental deficiencies of App Store Attribution Kit and therefore won't move the needle on its adoption. It seems clear to me that Apple's principal mistake with SK Ad Network, which is what it was formerly called, the reason it failed was instigating ATT before the functionality of SK Ad Network was in place. In the absence of robust platform-based measurement framework, the largest ad platforms pieced together their own patchwork measurement solutions, and now none of them has any incentive to integrate deeply with SK Ad Network / App Store Attribution Kit. Anecdotally, I only see App Store Attribution Kit postbacks being used by advertisers in media mix models where real-time feedback isn't necessary. So yeah, kind of in summary, and this is something we've been talking about a lot on the podcast, and I've been talking a lot about in private conversations, is that to be quite frank, Facebook, Google, and others are fingerprinting. It's technically against Apple's rules. It's technically against the letter of the law, but for many reasons, Apple is turning a blind eye to that fingerprinting. And so what has happened is that because SK Ad Network, and this is kind of giving a little more nuance to what Eric said, what happened is that because SK Ad Network wasn't good, Meta, Google, and others had to fingerprint to get any kind of effective measurement, and then they got so good at that that there's just not a lot of incentive for them right now to use SK Ad Network / Ad Attribution Kit, and so there were updates, but as Eric said, it's hard to see this kind of creating any fundamental shift. I think Apple would need to offer both more carrots and more sticks in order for Ad Attribution Kit to really take off and become a primary source of attribution. And to that end, Apple did announce that they're going to further crack down on fingerprinting. That freaked me out. That freaked Eric out. I saw kind of like growth Twitter, app growth Twitter freaking out a little bit when it was announced, I think in the platform State of the Union, that fingerprinting was going to be something that they cracked down on. But Eric did follow up on this and kind of dug deeper into it. And his kind of summary that he posted on Twitter and wrote an article about is that from what anyone can tell at this point, it does seem as though the crackdown on fingerprinting is almost exclusively targeted at data brokers, not ad networks. So the sense is they're going to continue to turn a blind eye to all the fingerprinting that's going on and only break it for data brokers and folks like that, not for Facebook and Google. And I keep saying Facebook, it's Meta, but whatever. The interesting tidbit there, I don't think Eric talked about, but I thought of as I was reading through all this and thinking through it for this live stream is that even though Apple today is not cracking down on Meta and Google and other big Apple Oven and other big networks and MMPs and stuff, they could at any moment weaponize this, because technically what all these folks are doing is against the rules of the iOS platform. And so this is a stick that they could use to try and get more people to use Ad Attribution Kit. But it's a stick that if they use, will be the meme of like putting the stick in the bicycle tire. They'll be like, oh yeah, like privacy is so good, and then they stick it in the tire and like apps stop growing. I feel like ATT was a little bit of that, where apps really struggled post ATT to grow because there wasn't, the SKAD network was not good enough to actually replace what came before it. So, and that means something I've been saying for years. I'm so in favor of the spirit of ATT. I care about privacy. I don't want to be tracked across the web and all that kind of stuff. But what happened with AT&T is they put the cart before the horse a little bit and didn't provide a good alternative. And so I think we'd be in a very similar situation, is that even as much as they put into Ad Attribution Kit as of 2025, I don't think it's good enough to replace the fingerprinting. Therefore, I think they recognize that if they weaponized this new fingerprinting uh, um, crackdown against Meta and Google and others, it would be kind of self-defeating, and it would be very problematic for the broader ecosystem, and then therefore problematic to Apple earnings and the success of the App Store and everything else like that. So long-winded way to say, I don't know that it's super important this year, but Apple did add multiple re-engagement and conversion events to SKAD network. They added customizable conversion and conversion windows and cooldowns. And this is all like the nitty gritty stuff that actually probably some of you listening to the podcast know way more about than I do. But it comes into, if somebody sees your ad one place and it gets attributed to that ad, but then they see another ad, how much time in between seeing those two ads should reset so that the second ad gets credit versus the first ad get credit. And that especially comes into account for re-engagement ads, is that if the download happens and then they see a re-engagement ad, does the download ad get credit because it happened within 24 hours, or does the retargeting ad get credit because that's what really led? So they're starting to build out more kind of fine-grained tooling for that. But again, unfortunately, nobody seems to really use it, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change just based on the way things are. I'm sure you're super excited to jump in here, Charlie, and any thoughts there?
No, not really. I haven't dug into how all of this stuff works super deeply, to be honest. The only extra color I'll add is, in addition to sticking the stick in the tire and maybe potentially harming the business if they were decided to use that stick, is also the regulation environment is oddly both directions on this, even for areas that are like very privacy focused. It did seem like there was some fear of monopolistic behavior there. So they might want to like back off of that as well, in that regard. But to be honest, I don't understand that world well enough to say anything super intelligible there.
Yeah. Well, I was planning on ending on that topic, but that's such a freaking downer. So let's give our kind of final takes on things as we wrap up. So Charlie, give me a summary. What are the vibes coming out of WWDC 25?
I mean, in person, the vibes are good. I think there wasn't some big new device like the Vision Pro or big new announcement like Apple Intelligence last year. But instead, there was a significant number of quality of life improvements and APIs that, at least talking to people, everybody had a different new API they were excited about. But definitely the one that everybody's the most excited about is the foundation models and how they can work those into their app. And so I think there's a good chance we're going to see some fun, interesting, innovative features in apps. And maybe I'll be surprised and there will be some like big tentpole type features that come out of this as well. I think there's a decently high potential, and certainly I'm excited to see how this progresses over time as Apple improves these models.
Yeah. And I'll say too, I think for me, the vibes coming out of WWDC are good. I'm personally very excited about liquid glass and kind of what this means as an opportunity for developers in the fall. I'm excited about liquid glass, just using it. I showed my 10-year-old son the iMessage backgrounds, and he was like, "Ooh, I want that." And it's those kind of things where like, yeah, we can all say, oh, that's ugly or that's weird or whatever, but people like this kind of stuff, and there were a lot of really fun things for consumers. I think and you've said this a few times, that iOS 26 does just feel fun. It feels like Apple's doing new things, trying new things, doing fun things. And is it, you know, maybe not the biggest developer story, maybe not the most new APIs. It definitely needs refinement, but I left WWDC very excited about the future of Apple's platforms. And then, anybody who's been following me on Twitter or, talks to me in private knows I've been pretty critical of Apple, even more so in the last year, and very concerned about their future and what it says about them as an organization. That it feels like they missed AI. Although the spin this week was we didn't miss AI, we started with the wrong approach, and we're quickly going to catch up, which means they missed AI and they're having to like regroup. And the leaks are that they had to completely reorganize the AI team and move somebody new in charge. And so all of those things have left me very concerned about Apple and very critical of Apple, to be honest. But I think there was a lot to read between the lines of that actually left me encouraged. Ben Thompson had a really great post called Apple Retreats. And you would think from the headline, Apple Retreats, like, ooh, like they're, tail between their legs, they've given up, they're retreating. But his point was, and I think if you read between all the lines this week, is that Apple's retreating back to what they do really well, in that there are so many little nice to haves. And I like the experience of iOS 26 with liquid glass, with the user experience changes, with iMessage backgrounds, like with all of these things, is that it's what Apple does best. It's like building great platforms, building great user experiences. And his point was kind of like last year they overextended themselves a little bit, maybe, where they're not as good at these cloud-based models and AI and all those other things. But I think by retreating and not kind of over promising like they did last year, and by letting it be a letdown of WWDC, because I think in one hand they could have made WWDC more exciting by announcing things that maybe weren't quite ready. But it's almost a good sign that they were humble enough to like let WWDC be a little underwhelming, and then now they can over deliver and under promise instead of over promising and under delivering. And so on all those fronts, and again, reading between a lot of lines and a lot of conversations I had while in Cupertino, I'm excited. The Apple fanboy in me is coming back a little, and so I don't know. Maybe I need to lay off the Twitter shit posting a little bit and give Apple a little room to breathe. And I think we're going to see some good things from them in the coming years. And so I think my vibes coming out of WWDC are strong, and I feel like we're starting to see the inklings of a new Apple that is better poised to grow in the coming years. And I think that's encouraging to us as developers, because a lot of us are, whether or not you're an indie that's solely working on iOS, or even a big company where maybe 80% of your revenue is on iOS, like every little thing Apple does, every little decision they make, every API they give access to, every change to app review, maybe we didn't get the big things like dropping the fee to 15%. There's a lot of things we still want. But every little improvement they make to their platforms, every little improvement they make to developer experience does matter to us, and it matters to us more so than pretty much anything else, because it is the primary place where most of us monetize our apps. So yeah, I'm leaving encouraged. I think there's a lot of potential. Will Apple deliver? Big question mark, but I'm excited.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm happy to see a little bit of spark of joy in David's eyes again. That's always exciting. And so yeah, I mean, I think I already gave my feelings, but yeah, generally speaking, I'm very excited, and I can't wait to go play with everything once I get home.
Yeah, left you hanging there, but I just want to give you a chance to say something since I keep monologuing. All right, well, as we wrap up, for those of you on the podcast, if you have questions for me and Charlie, go to YouTube. So, breaking news: I actually released the first short form YouTube video today on the Celeb Club channel. I went over the test results. So at Revenue Cat, we ran a 4-variant test, experimenting with web paywalls and linking out to the web. And I released a YouTube video going over those results with charts and graphs and data and my analysis and everything else. And I will be releasing more of those kind of videos on the YouTube channel. And so for those of you on the podcast who want to ask Charlie and I questions, go to YouTube, because that's somewhere we're going to be more active in releasing more videos and more active in the chat and things like that. For those of you on the webinar, we will take some more questions. If you have questions, dump it into the questions tab. I've got a few minutes. If Charlie needs to bounce, he can, but happy to answer some questions since we're here live. And those of you who made it through all 90 minutes deserve a little something for sticking around. So feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have any questions. And I'll wait awkwardly for questions. This will get edited out of the YouTube of the podcast. So usually with these live chats, I guess we didn't talk about it at the beginning, but usually with the live chats, we have a million questions that get asked in the questions tab. I probably should have said at the start that you have questions, drop them in the questions tab.
Yeah, there's a separate questions tab that you can use as well.
All right. Well, it looks like nobody's jumping on asking questions. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll end the stream here. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Charlie.